Don't look now, but the Steelers may have some serious questions about how they need to approach the safety position in this offseason. We'll talk about that, salary cap, draft questions. It's a mailbag episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting platform, but especially you can find this show on YouTube. If you do find the show on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And don't forget, FanDuel is doing the NBA, so you can still make money there. All right, listeners, it's going to be a solo show today with me. Tomorrow we'll have Josh Taylor. The day after that, we'll have Wes Euler. Then we'll finish out the week with Jenna Harner. But I figured we could do some more mailbag questions. If you missed the Mock Draft Monday show, we got our first Mock Draft Monday winner, and you got my first 7-round mock for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That was Mondays. But let's get into some of the questions that you had here. And one of the questions brings up, I think, something very important about the Steelers' safety position. Here's our man, Nate Glass, all the way out in Los Angeles, California. He's always got questions. I always appreciate Nate. Here was a good one from him.
Hey, Chris, Nate Glass from California. My question is about the safeties. I listened to a mock draft on YouTube. Not too sure which expert mock draft this is, but they had us at number 17 taking the safety branch with the 17th pick. And at first I was thinking, well, we still got Terrell Edmunds, but I just remember Terrell Edmunds is a free agent. So my question for you is, do you think we're going to re-sign Terrell Edmunds? And if we don't, does that make the safety position a top priority probably within the first 2 picks of the draft?
Thank you, Nate, for your question. And I think that's a pertinent one, because one thing that Nate, said, I didn't realize about Terrell Edmunds, most people don't realize is both Edmunds and Damontae Kazee are free agents this offseason. And that puts the Steelers in a bind here. Their safeties right now are Minkah Fitzpatrick and Trey Norwood. And that puts you in a position where you do got to make moves at the safety position. Now, here's the thing. Brian Branch, I think, is a really good prospect in the NFL draft this year. I think he's going to go first round. He may fall to the Steelers. He might not. He might actually go sooner. But I look at Brian Branch as more of a slot type of guy, a guy that plays closer to the line of scrimmage, less of the free safety guy. But that is kind of what you want if you want another guy that's an option there. But here's where I push back against the idea of drafting the guy, and I do lean more to signing those two guys, specifically those two guys, because you have the NFL's leading intercepting defense last year, and that was with that secondary with those guys, and that was without T.J. Watt for 2 months of the season, where that pressure usually generates more interceptions for your defense. Terrell Edmunds isn't an intercepting phenom. He's a guy that we know he's the glue guy. He's the guy that's going to cover tight ends, cover running backs, cover receivers, be here, be there. Just don't ask him to go too deep in coverage, but he's really good at inside, around the line of scrimmage, and he helps you out there a lot. Damontae Kazee was actually good way off the ball and was good with his ball skills and did help there, especially when he got healthy. And you're probably sitting, well, Chris, they probably cost a lot of money, and they were part of the reason why the Steelers had the most expensive defense in the league. But if you said that, you'd be wrong. You know why? Because collectively, they cost about $2 million against the Steelers' salary cap. According to Spot Rack, their cap hits were $1.1 million for Edmunds and $870,000 for Kazee. Now, I am pretty sure those prices would go up if the Steelers re-signed them both this year, but I also think it's worth it. I think that even if you're combining to be $4 or $5 million between those guys, I'd keep bringing them back. Especially because right now, if you brought them back, you'd be very happy with your safety room. And you have other things to address right now on your roster to get better for the long term. Offensive line, again, defensive line, linebacker. You have Minkah Fitzpatrick for the next 5-6 years. He's going to be in Pittsburgh for a while. So you might not necessarily have to draft a safety right now, especially when you have other concerns that are there. Now, here's the thing, and we'll get into this a little bit more later in the week with trade talk and everything, but I would be interested if he's in 17 and someone desperately wants a Brian Branch and they want to cough up an extra second-round pick or an extra third-round pick for him. That might be an interesting move. And I like Brian Branch. I think if the Steelers drafted him, I think he'd be very good for them. I think that he'd be a Cam Sutton type in that he could play in the slot, but also play outside, but also play off ball. I think he's a guy that you could plug in a lot of different spots, and he'd be very comfortable. And I think that he's a guy that you can that people can rally around. So that, not to demean that position or to say that that's not important, but I think that with the other needs that this team has, they need a pure outside corner for the future. I think they need off-ball linebackers. They need defensive linemen, offensive, like all the positions we've been talking about. I feel like safety is one of the ones that you can feel like safety, running back, starting quarterback. You're fine in. There's not many positions that I think the Steelers could say, hey, you're good here as long as you do, bring back these two guys. But safety's one of them. I don't think that they need to be that aggressive there. And I do think that that could be interesting. Also, here's the other thing. If you don't sign Terrell Edmunds and say you don't even get Brian Branch, this isn't exactly the safety class that you'd want to be fishing for a safety for because you didn't sign those two guys. The next guy that I think collectively everyone has as the number 2 safety in this draft class is Antonio Johnson. And look, I like Antonio Johnson out of Texas A&M. His size is really nice. He's 6'3", so he has that range. But he's more of a box type player at the safety position. He'll be up closer to the line of scrimmage. He's long. He can go get guys. I think that would be really good. I think that he would be really good in the slot as well. But again, and he's more of a second-round pick. You wouldn't need a first-round pick on him. But again, I think that this is a team that right now you can bring back Edmunds and Kazee for not that expensively. I think both of them loved their time in Pittsburgh. We've seen that. Terrell Edmunds has tested free agency already. This is where he ended up. I think Kazee, he seemed to really bond with Edmunds and Fitzpatrick. And if you bring back that trio, you're in a good position. Now, in another year or two, I do think eventually you might want to draft another safety because you don't want to have to pay. You're already paying Minkah Fitzpatrick to be one of the most expensive safeties, if not the most expensive safety in the NFL. And you don't want to pay too much into one position there because you want to be able to divvy up your salary cap space. But again, I don't think you're paying too much to keep those guys around for at least another year, maybe another 2 years. And that group has shown they're pretty good when they get to play around each other. So that being said, yes, to answer Nate Glass's question, sign Terrell Edmunds, sign Damontae Kazee, come back loaded, and maybe take a flyer on the safety position. Like, one guy that, I've brought up, I'll be bringing up this offseason, Brandon Hill, a guy from Pitt. If he's floating around in the 7th round, and he's sitting there, scoop a guy up like that and see if he works out. But I don't think you need to make it a priority because I do think you need to make it a priority in this free agency period to go make sure that you're keeping your own guys. But that being said, can those guys, what's the likelihood of those guys taking another contract that is very team friendly in that situation? There was another question that was really good from one of our listeners. We'll address that question in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. So don't go anywhere. But first, we got to talk to you guys because our sponsor is Built Bar. This show is sponsored by Built Bar, and Built Bar, of course, is the ultimate protein bar that tastes like a candy bar because every Built Bar is covered in 100% chocolate, and they come in so many different flavors. They come in flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, double chocolate brownie. they're awesome. All the flavors that they got, if you have a type, they're going to find it for you. But the crazy thing about this is you get all that flavor, the 100% chocolate covering each Built Bar, and these things only pack 130 calories. They only pack 4 grams of sugar, and they somehow find a way to fit 17 grams of protein into every Built Bar. It's amazing, and it's why you need to get yourself Built Bars right now. And you don't have to go to built.com and order them to your door and wait for them to arrive anymore. You could pick them up in your local Walmart and your local Sam's Club. That's right. Go to your local Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and you can grab yourself a box of Built Bars by picking up a 4-bar box of flavors like cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. Or if you're close to a Sam's Club, run and grab a 13-bar box with hit flavors like brownie batter and churro. Trust me, when you try Built Bars, you'll thank me because you're trying the best protein bar out there, and you won't believe how much it tastes like a candy bar. Go get some Built Bars today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing with our Mailbag Tuesday episode right now, answering questions from our listeners. By the way, you could call in at any point in time, 412-223-6644. Be sure to leave your name, where you're from, and keep your message around a minute tops so that we're not, pushing too long with some of the questions. We want to get through different ones. This question, though, kind of relates to what I was talking about with the idea of guys taking friendly discounts. This is a man, AJ, from Pittsburgh, a Pittsburgh guy, talking about the hometown discount and what goes into it. And I thought it was a good question, that not just about the Steelers, but about the concept of players taking discounts. Here's AJ's question.
Hey, Chris, this is AJ. I'm a Pittsburgh lifer. I've been listening to your show since the start of this past season, and you have been my first listen every day. So I appreciate what you've been doing. But my question for you comes from not really understanding a whole lot about contracts and how players view their salaries. So, I completely understand that players need to get paid what they deserve. It's their livelihood. They put their bodies on the line. They got to get paid. And maybe this comes from a place where I have no idea what it's like to be a multimillionaire. I can't even fathom it. But I'm wondering if it's commonplace in the league today, if there are players that drink the Kool-Aid of an organization and will take a little less money from a team that they want to stay on instead of going to get paid more somewhere else in order to, help that organization save money, build the team up. Does this happen often or at all? Is there a place for that mindset in the league today? And, especially on the Steelers, can the Steelers be helped out by that kind of mindset? Does it happen? I just don't know. So it's something I've always wondered. And have a great day, man. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you, AJ, for being a listener and getting your Steelers information here and making us your first listen every day. Now, let's address the idea of hometown discounts. Now, I think that one thing, there are times when it is said that a player is giving a hometown discount, but it's just that they're moving their money in a way that they'll get paid later and it won't impact the cap that season. But sometimes there are legitimate moves made to help, say, hey, I will sacrifice this money to lower my cap hit, and you'll put the team in a better situation. I think an example of that recently was Aaron Jones took that kind of a deal from the Green Bay Packers. I think Aaron Jones read the writing on the wall. He knows that running backs don't exactly get too many extra big contracts in their career, and the Packers have AJ Dillon coming right behind him, so he knows that if he wants to stick around with this team that knows him and the quarterback that knows him, he's going to need to help them out with some money so that they can afford to keep other guys and bring other guys in. And yes, there are times that guys help with that. And to answer the question as far as why, it is very much a negotiating tactic. It is something that teams will use. I think it's less about the idea of drinking Kool-Aid and more so about the idea of saying, look, I need to, seeing the value of giving this team, of saying, hey, I'm going to sacrifice this couple $1 million here. I'm sacrificing this money in my contract to say, hey, you know what? I want to be on a better team. And if this team says that we can keep these guys together, we'll do that. Like, for example, Larry Fitzgerald, when he was with the Cardinals, openly said, at a podium, he said, I will take a pay cut to keep Anquan Bolden on this team. And Anquan Bolden still went somewhere else and got paid. But there's times the guys did that. Tom Brady had very team-friendly contracts for the Patriots for more than a decade after his rookie contract until he started getting paid because he was like, yeah, it's my turn. But that was a big reason why the Patriots were able to keep reloading so much during his era with the Patriots, because he kept taking team-friendly contracts. And Ben Roethlisberger at the end of his career did help out the Steelers with a couple moves at the end of his career when his contract number was up pretty high. This is all part of the game in the NFL. Teams sign guys to contract. They try to put them in positions where the team will have the wiggle room to make the moves where if this guy isn't that good, that they can find a way to either get out of the contract without it hurting the team too much, or, find a way to try to trim it down in other ways and say, hey, you know what, we like you, but we got to find ways to work this out. The Steelers have that situation right now. I think, we talked about Terrell Edmunds and Damontae Kazee. I don't think those two will be big of a problem. Cameron Sutton's going to be the interesting one, and that's why I used him. If you're watching on YouTube, that's why I used his picture to go with the card for AJ's question. But Cameron Sutton, he was drafted by the Steelers. He's played for the Steelers. He's never played anywhere else. He developed as a rookie third-round pick who, was filling in for an injured Joe Hayden in his rookie season and, developing. And now he's a vocal leader in the secondary. And this year he was their best cornerback. And I think he's important to the team. But the question is, does he sit there and say, you know what, I'm making my millions. I'm going to make more millions. Maybe I'll take a $10 million deal instead of a $12 million deal. I don't think he will. I think that the team will be willing to pay him because he has lived up to and surpassed his expectations. I think as a third round cornerback for the Steelers. But I think that he's going to be positioned. He can if he wants to, but it's less about the Kool-Aid and more about seeing like what value can I get out of this. Like Juju could have probably signed for a more expensive contract somewhere else than the Chiefs. But when the Chiefs, he knew that by being with the Chiefs, he had a chance to compete. He had a chance to go to the Super Bowl, and he went to the Super Bowl, and now he is a Super Bowl champion. Sometimes it's about that, because also players might look at it and say, you know what, my branding, my profile, if I'm part of a championship team, it raises my chance to get more sponsors and to make more money, and then it'll pay off on its own. So some of it is just balancing things like that into the equation there. And teams are going to try to say what they got to say to players. I've never been at that negotiating table. There's NFL players who can attest to how that situation goes. But certainly there are players who realize like, hey, either my time is, I'm not in my prime anymore, or I need to protect myself because I want to stay with this team and I don't want to have to go to another organization and finish things out. Because there are times that guys, they go to other teams and it doesn't work out. We've seen some of the Steelers of late, it work out for them. Javon Hargrave, Mike Hilton, they went to other teams, they flourished, and they're doing very well for themselves. But there's been plenty of guys, dating back to going in the Wayback Machine. Franco Harris, he was a Seahawk when he retired because he went somewhere else because he was trying to get more money and the Steelers weren't having it. And that's crazy to think, with the legendary Franco Harris. But you go look at that. James Harrison, when he went to the Bengals, and then he went to the Patriots. There's just times where sides don't see eye to eye, and neither side's going to budge. So one side goes out and gets money. But how many times has that worked against those players where they go somewhere and it just doesn't work out? And Steelers in the 2000s had a few of the times that happened. Antoine Randall got a super payday somewhere else, but at Washington, but eventually he came back to Pittsburgh because it didn't work out there. Their offense wasn't that good. Didn't feature his skills. Then he came back and he was, a nice piece added to the puzzle that got them to Super Bowl 45. I think Bryant McFadden was another guy who I think he left temporarily, came back, and was an asset to the Steelers. It's things like that. And sometimes it is about betting on yourself, but it's a negotiating thing where guys are just weighing out their options, saying, hey, you know what? This team is giving this deal. Maybe if I help with this, they'll protect me in that. And there's also, trust and, and a relationship where guys are believing that, hey, you know what? If I do this for this team, they're going to look out for me. And I think the Steelers, that's one thing that when you hear a lot of guys talk about, the familial organization and how people look out for you there and how people care for you and they don't lie to you. That is why I think the Steelers do some of the things that they do, like people wanting them to cut Matt Canada loose. I think that part of it, they're honoring the contract that they had to Matt Canada. They don't, and they feel that he's doing that that the progress that him and Kenny Pickett can make next year will justify them keeping him. They won't just keep a guy just to keep a guy, because obviously the Steelers have cut plenty of guys in their time. But at the same time, there are many players who can say like, hey, like I did this thing. Like Jerome Bettis. It's funny enough, Jerome Bettis and Hines Ward both were guys who were pushing for more money at times. The Steelers got him to come to the table. From Hines Ward was even like holding out at one point. Got him to come to the table. They did the deal that they needed, and then they stuck around for the Steelers, and they were in a really good position. And in fact, when Le'Veon Bell was doing his push with the Steelers, trying to get more guaranteed money out of them, because that was his big thing. He just wanted guaranteed money because he didn't know, what was going to be there from the Steelers. Like, hey, we don't do the guaranteed money thing. And what Jerome Bettis and Hines Ward, if I remember correctly, what they were saying at the time was like, listen, Le'Veon, the Steelers don't blink in this situation. And in fact, I would think I was on this show saying the Steelers don't blink in this situation. And they didn't blink. And and then Le'Veon Bell got his money, got paid by the Jets, but like we were talking about with some of the other athletes, didn't work out there. And now he's boxing, doing celebrity boxing matches. And that's not to make fun of him. It's the gamble that you take. So sometimes guys want to stay on the teams that they grew up on, or that they progressed with, because they know they'll have a place, they'll have a locker room, they'll have familiarity, and they'll have senior leadership. I think that means something. They want to build something with the guys that they've been working with during their career. So I think Cam Sutton, Terrell Edmunds, guys like that, they might buy into something like that. It's not a Kool-Aid thing, more of like a, hey, you know what? I just think this will be more beneficial. And sometimes also it's personal, with your family. Like, your family may be connected to an area and you don't want to uproot your kids. Sometimes it is that. Sometimes it's not. But there's a bunch of decisions out there. But I think that was a very sensible question, AJ. You brought up, these are decisions by guys that are, there's a ticking clock on when they can make this big money in their lives, and they're using it to their best ability. So thank you for the question, AJ, on hometown discounts. We got one more question. It revolves around draft, free agency, and the Steelers front office. We'll get to that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. So don't go anywhere, because we definitely have some fun things to talk about there. But first, we got to talk to you guys about FanDuel. And of course, FanDuel is the #1 sports book in America. They sponsor this show. And now that we're past the All-Star break, the NBA is about to get its games up again. And FanDuel, being America's #1 sportsbook, is here to help you out. New customers can get a no-sweat first bet for up to $1,000, and that's bonus bets that you get back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can then you can bet on anything and everything, from the money line to point scores to how many threes are drained. And FanDuel even lets you make the player prop bets to give you so many opportunities, including same game parlays, to help you get even bigger payouts on your bets. And you can get paid right away. So don't miss out the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, continuing our Mailbag Tuesday episode here. We've talked about the safety position. We've talked about hometown discounts. Now, here's a question from our man Parker in Brooksville, asking about how the Steelers need to balance their offseason plan as far as how they balance free agency and the NFL draft. Here is Parker.
Hey, Chris. This is Parker from Bushville, Pennsylvania. I was wondering your thoughts about this upcoming draft and free agency. Should the Steelers go after a few players onto the draft and save some of them for free agency? Like, do a little split list so they're not, like, running around, oh, we should get this guy or get this guy. They would just, like, do the good old Steelers way? Let me know. And great show, Steel Nation. Here we go.
Thank you very much for your question, Parker. Appreciate the love and appreciate the question there. The Steelers have their plans for how to handle things, and Omar Khan is a number cruncher. This is what he's always done. He's been able to find ways to fit things. That's kind of who Howie Roseman has been, was for the Eagles. That's who he was for the Eagles before he became their GM. And I think that the Steelers are in a position where they're trying to figure out how to build with the core guys they have in place that they've paid the money, TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Cam Hayward, and they're trying to fit other pieces around and how they want to do things here. And this is where I think things get tricky in the offseason when it comes to free agency. And this is why a lot of people often say they wish that free agency happened after the draft, because then you could draft for your needs, and whenever you don't get, then you can go sign in free agency. But the draft is so much tougher because you don't have control over who goes where. Whereas in free agency, you don't have control over the players, but you can get into bidding wars and you can make sure that, hey, like, we need this position. We're going to go out and we're going to go get that position. But that's neither here nor there because you can't change the schedule of the NFL season. But I look at free agency for the Steelers right now, and I think their biggest concern right now is to keep the players that they can that are about to hit free agency. We've talked about Cam Sutton, Terrell Edmunds, Damontae Kazee. I think even Robert Spillane, guys like that you could bring back for low cap hits. Except Cam Sutton, he'll be considerable cap hit. But guys that you can bring back that are reasonable. And then once you're there in free agency, then I think that you make some moderate moves. Bring in guys that you think will, you could bring on 2-year test them deals like how you did with Steven Nelson. And I think that you can bring in, or like Levi Wallace, the deal that he's on now, and say like, hey, we're bringing you in. If you do great, awesome, we keep you. If not, this doesn't tie us to you for too long, and we can cut ties there. That's certainly part of the answer here. But something that Mike Tomlin has said when we've talked to him about this is that a big reason for the philosophy for the Steelers, why they build through the draft and not as much through free agency, is because you get into more situations. And he didn't necessarily say this person, but if you remember Melvin Ingram, when he came to the Steelers, Melvin Ingram said all the right things when he came to the Steelers. He said, oh, it doesn't matter if I'm not starting behind Alex Highsmith. It's totally fine. Yeah, it'd be great. And then as soon as he wasn't starting behind, he started starting in front of Alex Highsmith. It was like, okay, this isn't what I thought it would be. I'm out of here. And then he was traded away. And Mike Tomlin said, we want volunteers, not hostages. You are a lot more likely when you draft a player for you to get volunteers. And I think that's where the Steelers are at with their balance of how to use free agency versus the draft. They want to use most of their money on guys that they either drafted or brought into the organization. Like Minkah Fitzpatrick, yes, he's traded in, but he's a guy that's been here. He's a Steeler. He's a guy that's there. He understands the culture and the environment. But when you're paying free agency and you're bringing a lot of outside guys in, sometimes it's harder to get them to conform to what you're doing. You get guys like LeGarrette Blount, another guy who just literally walked off the field because he wasn't getting the reps that he thought he should. And that sometimes that can be problematic. And it's just been the Steelers' way to build through the draft. And I think that's still the key that you want to do for any team, right? Like you want to build guys that you're on your own. And the other thing is when you're building through the draft, you get 4, sometimes 5, if you get a first round pick, 4 or 5 years of guys on rookie contracts that are very favorable to you, that give you opportunities to save money and to go get and to pay the veterans that you've kept around. And again, free agency moves, you need them. You don't always hit on draft picks. And sometimes there's some really good free agents that work out for you. Miles Jack, I think, brought in and steadied the linebacker room. Larry Ogunjobi, I thought was a really good piece to help that defensive line and work with Cam Hayward in lieu of Stephon Tuitt's retirement. James Daniels was such a huge boost to the offensive line, as was Mason Cole. It's not that free agency is the devil. It's just more of a thing that you only tap into sometimes when you need it rather than depending on it. So to kind of get into Parker's question, I think that it's just more so the Steelers are going to build primarily through the draft and then supplement it with free agency. And in this offseason, I think it's going to be very similar. They'll do work. They'll use a lot. I think they'll use a decent bit of the money that they free up when they start making moves to free up cap space on keeping guys that they know are part of their organization right now. They will definitely add some faces, free agency that are from other places. But bottom line, I think they will be more than happy to keep their guys, build through the draft, add a couple guys who understand that what their role is. When they come into the Steelers, they're not looking for anything that big. They're looking to do their job. They fit in, and who knows? Maybe if they're young enough, you make them part of the culture, and then maybe they stick with you for a while. James Ferry was a guy who came in. He was a draft pick by the Jets, played really well for them. they didn't want to pay him. He came to the Steelers, and then he became one of the best linebackers in the modern times of the NFL that the Steelers had on their roster. He's such a huge part of those 2 Super Bowl championship teams. So that's it. That's to answer your question, Parker. And this has been a mailbag episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks so much for checking us out. Remember, you can find us on your favorite podcasting app and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you saw it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And if you want to help out the show even further, go on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review with a positive comment. Do both at the same time. You get a shout out at the end of the show. As I said before, we'll be back tomorrow with our man, Josh Taylor. He makes his triumphant return to the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll see you then. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. I'm Chris Carter. You can also read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover all things Pitt athletics. I'll also be at the Pitt game Tuesday night. If you will be, come say hi. I'll be in the press box leading up to tip-off and all throughout the game. So thanks again, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.